Today our topic is respiratory failure. We will again be covering this domain in two classes. So I will be covering this in two classes. Basically, this is a topic where you can occasionally get tested in your part one exam. They might ask you two kinds of questions when it comes to respiratory failure. They might ask you clinical questions, or they might occasionally also ask you physiology based questions, right? Obviously the two of them are related. Once you understand the pathophysiology behind most of these problems, it becomes a lot easier for you to know how to address them. So basically, I have divided this into multiple MCQs, and let's try to make this interactive. Please try to answer the MCQs to the best of your abilities, and then after that we can discuss the answer, and the slides following that will have more explanation, and that's how we'll cover topic by topic, right? So, it is a respiratory failure is essentially a life-threatening condition in which the respiratory system fails in one or both of its primary functions. So, what are these primary gas exchange functions? It is oxygenation and carbon dioxide elimination. So, when your respiratory system is failing in either one or both of these, that's when you say that there is a imminent respiratory failure, and it is obviously a life-threatening condition. So, gas exchange occurs at the alveolo-capillary membrane, that is the juncture between the alveoli and the capillaries, right? And of course, it requires an adequate ventilation, perfusion, and diffusion. All three of these things are necessary for adequate gas exchange, that is, transfer of oxygen and carbon dioxide. And if you have a problem with any three of these, that can lead to either a decrease in your oxygen, that is reaching the rest of the body, or a decrease in the or an increase in the carbon dioxide, right? So failure of respiration can occur from a dysfunction at any of these levels. This could start from the CNS, where you have a decreased respiratory drive. If your patient is on sedatives, opioids, that could be one of the problems. Then, if the patient has a weak neuromuscular system, if they have certain myopathies like myasthenia, Guillain-Barré, right? This can also cause a respiratory failure. Then, problem with the airways. The airways, you can have some kind of obstructive pathology where there is typically a dynamic hyperinflation and a deficiency in the carbon dioxide elimination. Or it could be a problem in the lung parenchyma, right? Where you could have different kinds of problems. You could have a consolidation, you could have an effusion, you could have a collapse. And then finally, problems when it comes to the pulmonary circulation. A typical example would be pulmonary embolism. When your parenchyma is fine, your airways are fine, but you are basically having a deficiency in your pulmonary circulation. That can also cause a dysfunction, right? So these are the levels that we must typically check and try to identify at which level the problem is occurring, because obviously our treatment would differ slightly depending on the level of dysfunction. So how do we classify respiratory failure? We can broadly classify it as type 1 and type 2 respiratory failure. Type 1 respiratory failure is classically called your hypoxemic respiratory failure, when your PaO2 is less than 60 millimeters of mercury, right? But here there is typically a normal or a low PaCO2. So this is most common in VQ mismatch and shunt states, right? What is a VQ mismatch? What is a shunt? I'll come to that later. So this is your typical hypoxemic respiratory failure. When you have a hypoxemia, that is, you have a decreased oxygenation of the blood, but your carbon dioxide levels are either low or normal. Then you have your type 2 or hypocapnic respiratory failure, when your PaCO2 is more than 45 mm mercury. And this is often associated with hypoxemia. It is very rare to have a pure hypercapnia without a hypoxemia. So your type 1 is just a hypoxemia without a hypercapnia. Your type 2 is a hypercapnia, and it usually is associated with a hypoxemia. This is a core concept. And type 2 is typically due to alveolar hypoventilation, but it can be due to other causes. So respiratory failure is one of the major causes of ICU admission, and it is associated with high mortality and morbidity. and it also requires rapid recognition and targeted management. So again, if we classify it as hypoxemic or hypercapnic, hypoxemic respiratory failure can be acute, which develops over minutes to hours. For instance, a patient who's developed a pneumonia, or it can be chronic when it develops over several days to longer. Right? That is another way of dividing your hypoxemic respiratory failure. Hypercapnic respiratory failure, again, similarly can be divided into acute or chronic, right? Acute, which is developed within minutes to hours, and chronic, which is developed over several days. So what are your core mechanisms of respiratory failure? Number one is your VQ mismatch. It's the most common mechanism. What is this? This is basically when there is an imbalance between the ventilation and the perfusion. So either your ventilation is too much, but your perfusion is not enough, or your ventilation is not adequate, but you have a good perfusion, right? So this ratio is usually it ranges from around 1 to 3. So if you have ratios which are too high or too low, that can lead to problems. Typically in pneumonia, we see problems with the ventilation when our ventilation is inadequate, but the perfusion remains adequate. Compare that to pulmonary embolism, where your ventilation is fine, but you're not having any kind of perfusion, right? So these are two different spectra of the disorder. You can also have a shunt, what is typically called a right to left shunt, where your blood basically bypasses the ventilated alveoli, right? And this is typically seen in severe ARDS, severe pneumonia. And in this case, oxygen therapy has limited effect because let's say your alveoli are filled up with fluid. There's a big consolidation, very severe ARDS. In that case, even if your blood is just going to bypass those alveoli. So even if you're giving oxygen therapy, it might not have an adequate response. Then there may be problems with diffusion limitation. This is basically an impaired gas transfer across the alveolar membrane, typically seen ILD, where your membrane becomes impaired, right? And you can also have alveolar hypoventilation, where there is a reduced minute ventilation due to whatever cause. This leads typically to hypercapnia. And CNS depression, certain drugs, severe airway obstruction, these are common causes of an alveolar hypoventilation, typically leading to a type 2 respiratory failure. Right? So again, you can divide it into a primary oxygenation failure, where you might have a problem with, you might have a cardiac problem, or you might have an alveolar problem, you might have a shunt, you might have a VQ mismatch. All of this we have talked about, and obviously different therapies depending on the definite pathology. Or you might have a primary ventilatory failure. So respiratory muscle fatigue, CNS depression, muscle weakness, chest wall defects. All of this could also lead to an alveolar hypoventilation, leading to hypercapnia and respiratory acidosis. So what does the body do to compensate? It obviously tries to increase the respiratory rate and in turn try to increase the minute ventilation. The patient tries to use their accessory muscles, right? So that becomes a sign of respiratory fatigue. And tachycardia and increased cardiac output is also a compensatory response. When do you know the patient is transitioning to failure? Basically, when they're tiring out, their compensatory responses are becoming inadequate. This can lead to the vicious cycle of hypoxia, acidosis, and organ dysfunction. So we must recognize this and treat it at the earliest. Right? First question. Please try to answer these. Some of them are very basic, right? But you definitely need these concepts, right? So you have a 65-year-old ex-smoker who has COPD. Patient presents to you with dyspnea, tachypnea, confusion. This is the blood gas. pH 7.22, PCO2 64, PO2 55, and bicarb of 32. So how do you classify this? Very simple question. Anyone wants to answer?
4, acute hypercapnic.
Right. So do you wanna have another look at the ABG? And the clinical context. This is definitely a hypercapnic respiratory failure. I agree with you. But anything about the clinical scenario on the ABG which might make you differ?
ABG, there is respiratory acidosis.
What about the bicarbonate here? Does it give you a clue? Like, if you have an acute respiratory acidosis versus a chronic respiratory acidosis.
Bicarb increases by 3 in acute setting for every 10 increase in PaCO2. So here increase in PaCO2 is 20 approximately. So bicarb should increase by 6 to 8.
Yes,
If
but
it
he's
was an acute
confused and
respiratory
he's got
acidosis,
tachypnea.
right?
Yes.
Right. But this is slightly more than that, right?
It's life-threatening. He's confused, tachypnic, and acidotic.
So that means that there is a chronic component to this as well, right? So that's why it is an acute and chronic hypercapnic respiratory
Yes.
failure. Also, the clinical context is very important. This patient has a pre-existing COPD, right? So they're probably going to have a baseline higher carbon dioxide, and also what is going to happen as a result of it is that baseline bicarbonate is also going to be slightly higher, right? So the acute exacerbation is definitely causing an acidosis and a further rise in the PaCO2. But because it doesn't fit into your formula, like you said, of acute respiratory acidosis, this is typically an acute on chronic hypercapnic respiratory failure. Okay. So acute hypercapnic, your firstly the clinical context, right? A COPD, chronic CO2 retainer, would generally be chronic or acute on chronic. Acute hypercapnic, your pH would fall sharply, right? But the bicarb wouldn't rise much. So your bicarb would at best be 27, 28, right? So that's how you differentiate. Chronic, your pH can be near normal. You'll have a higher PaCO2. Why? Because your body has time to retain the bicarbonate, right? And acute and chronic is something between the two. So your PaCO2 would be high, your pH would fall, but your bicarbonate would be higher than predicted. Like she calculated the bicarbonate for acute respiratory acidosis, it was higher. That means there is an acute and chronic component. Okay? So this is the take home from this. So what are your common triggers in COPD patients? People who have a pre-existing hypercapnia, what throws them into an acute or chronic respiratory acidosis? The most common is obviously an infective exacerbation, bronchospasm, pneumothorax, pulmonary edema, certain drugs, right? These could be the common triggers in COPD patients. So a normalizing PaCO2 in a tiring COPD patient can also be seen as a pre-terminal sign, basically meaning that the patient is tiring out. And dynamic hyperinflation auto-PEEP can also contribute to worsening ventilatory failure. NIV is always first line if there is an acidosis with preserved airway reflexes, but you should monitor ABGs and do a blood gas within 1 to 2 hours and see how the patient is responding clinically and blood gas wise. If there is worsening or no improvement within 2 hours, then the next step is to intubate this patient.